In today's episode, we talk about critical thinking, not as an academic skill, but as a daily habit that quietly shapes every decision we make. This is an invitation to slow down, look deeper into our own thinking, and learn how to think with more clarity, fairness, and awareness. Critical thinking begins with a simple but uncomfortable truth: even though we all think every day, much of our thinking is flawed. It is often biased, incomplete, emotional, or shaped by habits we never chose consciously. Richard Paul and Linda Elder begin from this honest observation. They do not say that people lack intelligence. Instead, they remind us that thinking, left on its own, does not automatically improve. Like any skill, it must be trained, examined, and refined. Critical thinking, as they describe it, is the art of analyzing and evaluating our own thinking with the intention of improving it. This means stepping back from our thoughts and asking whether they make sense, whether they are fair, and whether they are grounded in reality. When we practice this consistently, the quality of our decisions improves, our relationships become clearer, and many unnecessary problems begin to fade. This kind of thinking is not passive. It is self-directed, meaning no one can do it for us. It is self-disciplined, meaning it requires effort even when we feel tired or uncomfortable. And it is self-corrective, meaning we must be willing to admit when we are wrong and adjust our thinking accordingly. At the heart of critical thinking lies a quiet commitment to excellence, and a willingness to challenge our natural egocentrism and sociocentrism. Every time we think, certain structures are always present, whether we notice them or not. We think for a reason. There is always a purpose behind our thinking, even if we are not aware of it. Sometimes the purpose is clear, like solving a problem. Other times it is hidden, like defending our ego or avoiding discomfort. Learning to clarify our purpose is the first step toward clearer thinking. We ask ourselves what we are really trying to achieve, and whether that goal is reasonable and ethical. Every act of thinking also revolves around a question. Sometimes the question is obvious, but often it remains vague. When we fail to define the real question, our thinking becomes scattered and confused. Clear thinking begins when we slow down and ask, what exactly am I trying to figure out here? Thinking also depends on information. This includes facts, data, personal experience, and what we have learned from others. But information alone does not guarantee good thinking. We must ask whether the information is accurate, relevant, and sufficient. Many poor decisions come not from lack of information, but from relying on information that is incomplete or misleading. From information, we draw conclusions. We interpret what we see and make inferences about what it means. This is where thinking often goes wrong. We jump to conclusions without enough evidence, or we interpret facts in ways that confirm what we already believe. Critical thinking asks us to slow down here, to examine whether our conclusions actually follow from the evidence. Our thinking is also shaped by concepts. These are the ideas, theories, and definitions we use to make sense of the world. Concepts can clarify, but they can also limit us if we use them carelessly. Critical thinkers try to use concepts precisely and remain open to alternative ways of understanding the same situation. Behind all thinking lie assumptions. These are beliefs we take for granted, often without realizing it. We assume certain things about people, about success, about life, and about ourselves. Critical thinking invites us to bring these assumptions into the light and ask whether they are justified or outdated. Every line of reasoning leads somewhere. It has consequences. Some are intended, others are not. A critical thinker takes time to consider the possible implications of their thinking, not only for themselves but also for others. And finally, all thinking takes place from a point of view. We all see the world through a particular lens shaped by culture, experience, and personal history. Critical thinking does not demand that we abandon our perspective, but it does ask us to recognize it and to seriously consider other viewpoints. To evaluate the quality of our thinking, Paul and Elder introduce universal standards. These standards act like a quiet inner checklist. We ask whether our thinking is clear, whether it is accurate, and whether it is precise enough to be meaningful. We ask whether it is relevant to the issue at hand, whether it goes deep enough to address complexity, and whether it is broad enough to consider other perspectives. We also examine whether our thinking is logical, whether the ideas fit together without contradiction. We ask whether we are focusing on what truly matters, rather than getting lost in trivial details. And perhaps most importantly, we ask whether our thinking is fair. Fairness means resisting the temptation to favor our own interests, or beliefs simply because they are ours. Critical thinking, however, is not just about technique. It is also about character. Without certain intellectual traits, even the best tools remain unused. Intellectual humility allows us to recognize the limits of our knowledge. It reminds us that being wrong is not a personal failure, but an opportunity to learn. Intellectual courage gives us the strength to examine ideas we dislike or fear. Intellectual empathy helps us genuinely understand others by seeing the world through their eyes, not just judging from our own position. Intellectual autonomy means thinking for ourselves rather than simply absorbing opinions from authority or the crowd. Intellectual integrity asks us to hold ourselves to the same standards we expect from others. Intellectual perseverance keeps us going when thinking becomes difficult or uncomfortable. Confidence in reason reassures us that honest thinking ultimately serves both personal and collective well-being. And fair-mindedness ties all these traits together, encouraging us to treat all viewpoints with equal respect. One of the greatest obstacles to critical thinking is egocentrism. This is the natural tendency to see ourselves as the center of reality. Egocentric thinking tells us that something must be true because we believe it, because our group believes it, because it makes us feel good, or because we have always believed it. This kind of thinking feels comfortable, but it quietly distorts reality. Sociocentrism expands this distortion to the group level. It leads us to see our culture, nation, or belief system as superior, while ignoring its flaws. Over time, this creates a narrow mental horizon, where conformity replaces reflection and loyalty replaces truth. The good news is that critical thinking offers practical ways to move beyond these limitations. We can learn to analyze what we read, identifying the author's purpose, the main question, the information used, and the conclusions drawn. We can evaluate research by examining assumptions, methods, and implications. We can approach problems systematically, defining them clearly and distinguishing what is within our control from what is not. We also learn to recognize different kinds of questions. Some questions have clear factual answers. Others express personal preference. And some require judgment, where multiple perspectives must be weighed carefully. Knowing the difference prevents unnecessary conflict and confusion. Becoming a critical thinker is not a sudden transformation. It is a gradual journey. At first, we may not even notice problems in our thinking. Then we become aware of them. We try to improve, often inconsistently. With practice, reflection becomes a habit. Over time, thinking becomes clearer, deeper, and more disciplined, until good reasoning begins to feel natural. The long-term vision behind this approach is the creation of a more critical society. A society where people do not rush to believe, where evidence matters, and where personal prejudice loses its grip. Such a society does not eliminate disagreement, but it handles disagreement with reason and respect. At its core, this philosophy reminds us that learning how to think is more important than accumulating information. When we commit to improving our thinking, we improve the quality of our lives and contribute quietly to a more